Take a little journey with me to 2005. Revenge of the Sith is out in theaters. Bread was $2.29 a loaf. YouTube and Reddit were born, and you got to play Resident Evil 4 on this stupid ass controller. Capcom has recently been on a hot streak when it comes to remakes. They started with Resident Evil 2 a few years back, which ended up becoming my favorite Resident Evil game to date, and then do a quick follow-up with Resident Evil 3. Overall, the quality of these games were incredible. So after those two, we knew Resident Evil 4 was somewhere out there just waiting to be popped out. But remaking RE4, which is often referred to as one of the best games of all time, is tough. So, is Capcom able to reimagine one of the franchise's most beloved entries while still making longtime fans happy? Well, that's a good start. Just like all the previous Resident Evil remakes, this game is absolutely gorgeous, and probably Capcom's best looking game to date. That's because they have this bad boy over here, the RE engine. This damn thing is so versatile, and Capcom is really coming to their own on how to get the most out of it. The fact DMC5, Monster Hunter Rise, Street Fighter 6, and RE4 all run on this thing is insane. Facial animations and characters look natural and clean. Now, I was just coming off playing Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 when I jumped into RE4, so it doesn't hit those highs, but it's still better than 95% of the rest of the stuff out there. The setting of RE4 is so fun and all over the place. Each section of the game has its own unique vibe to it, and that's one of the things that makes it feel so video gamey. The village section feels a little more grounded, with this European gothic horror thing going on that never gets tired. There's that weird culty thing with dudes chanting and walking around in robes, and then bam, you're infiltrating a military base with robot turrets all over the place. While it seems like the setting shift is out of nowhere, they do a really good job of slow playing it and make sure you're not getting any type of setting whiplash. Your enemies and obstacles match each game section to a T. This game can be campy and actiony and still have those survival horror game roots that'll send a chill down your spine. The castle especially has some great spooky moments and vibes. You stare at a room, hear something creak, and start tensing up because you know there's going to be some good old unpleasant encounter right around the corner. Regardless of how kitted out you are, you're going to catch yourself running away from a fight or two, either due to minimal resources or just having the hell scared out of you. Signposting and navigation is done really well. I never had an issue figuring out where I needed to go when I was running around a level. If you're stuck in a spot, they very clearly tell you what you're going to need in order to advance. So while you end up backtracking, it's almost always going to give you value. There are such great visual audio cues across the game that help get you progressing. Things like hitting the binoculars before big areas, the sound of the little wind-up doll, the merchant's purple torch. All of this stuff really helps guide you along in your zombie-infested journey. Also, since we're talking audio, you know I always have to shout out music when needed. This game has some bumpin' boss music. While the overworld minute-to-minute music is a little bit understated, boss themes are incredible. They stick with the epic gothic horror themes and have awesome production value. Every single boss feels like the game's finality because the music just feels that massive and magnificent. And in general, that's the story of this game's presentation. Over-the-top graphics, setting, characters, and music all make for a nice little gothic horror cocktail. Resident Evil 4 story is B-movie camp done to perfection. And it's primarily due to this motherfucker right here.
Sure your boys didn't come all the way out here to roast marshmallows.
Make your way to that church.
Right. I'm probably due for confession anyway. That one will.
Mr. Kennedy, who the hell are you?
Talk about sticking the landing. I'll let myself out. Where's everyone going? Bingo?
Dude, I love Leon. He is the perfect 2005 video game protagonist. He kicks ass, has goofy one-liners, and still stays cool as a cucumber. The initial story of RE4 is so delightfully 90s. Leon is now a special forces member after the events of Resident Evil 2, and now he's being sent to a Spanish village to save the president's daughter because of course he is. The president's daughter's been kidnapped, so yeah, let's send in one dude with a pistol. That ought to be enough. I can understand how this setting could annoy some people, but for me, I loved it so much. The game does a lot of its storytelling with big, chunky arcs with a big baddie at the end. This can make the game feel a little disjointed, but at the same time, it gave me the gift that is this guy.
Mr. Kennedy, how noble.
Ramon Salazar. I cannot express to you how much I also love this dude. He's one of my favorite video game villains. The fact he's just some 4-foot dude dressed up in like 18th century clothes wearing what I think is a powdered wig, I don't know how you can get any better than that. Aside from him, the cast is pretty fun. Louise is good comic relief, the shopkeeper is some old, gruff Australian dude just trying to make some money. There's Ashley, who's actually pretty bearable even though she gets kidnapped like 6 separate times. But I think her dynamic with Leon is really fun. Ada is the perfect femme fatale character, even if her voice acting isn't so great. Hunnigan is another character ripped straight out of 80s, 90s Hollywood. This whole thing where her and Leon have code names for each other and call Ashley Baby Eagle is some of the most ridiculous nonsense. The ensemble cast is just the best. Each character is cheesy and stupid in their own way, and the game doesn't try to cover that up. That's really what I think I like about this game. Capcom did such a great job of focusing on fun, silly characters because after all, this game is like 20 years old, and these characters were made 2 decades ago, so of course they're gonna seem cheesy. The overall story here is pretty good. I would never consider it bad in any spots, just sometimes it kind of pops all over the place. Where my biggest criticism of this game lies is all of its storytelling lives inside of logs and notes that you pick up. And I know, this is something I've praised games like The Last of Us for, but the big difference is notes in Last of Us are centered around world building and are not essential to character development and backstory bits. For example, I didn't really understand Krauser's story because I missed or breezed through some notes. So when I'm having this showdown with him, I don't fully understand who he is or why he's so mad at Leon. Louise, on the other hand, I felt like I really understood due to reading all of the stuff about him in the lab and other places. Really my issue is you can accidentally self-select out of meaningful character beats. Though, let's be honest, this game was never really about meaningful character interactions or development. I mean, at the end of the game, you basically tell Ashley she could be a secret agent after spending like 6 hours getting kidnapped by people. At its core, Resident Evil 4's mission is to make sure you have a lot of fun. And don't you worry, they got that covered with what makes RE4 so special. It's spectacular gameplay. The secret sauce of Resident Evil 4's gameplay is its variety. While from the outside it looks like a traditional third-person shooter, there is so much more going on here. I love how many different gameplay elements are just thrown into this game and make it a perfect little gameplay tornado. Sure, you have shooting, but you also have crafting, inventory management, shooting galleries, gacha games, minecart levels, puzzle solving, escort missions, and even more. The reason RE4 is able to do this so well is because it never shies away from being a video game. It never tries to take itself too serious or rationalize the gameplay to fit story beats. It's just there to be fun. Gunplay is fun and impactful. Sidebar, to get the best experience, I would say make sure your auto aim is off. The game dangles that carrot to try out different things on how you approach encounters. Do you just shoot the dude in the head so you can roundhouse them over and over and over and over? Do you flashbang them to have them drop their shield? Shoot their legs to slow them down? All of the variety is provided to you from the get-go. Now you can't go too crazy though, because there is some make every bullet count mentality going on here, but it never leaves you SOL. It normally just pushes you to try out other weapons. Resource management is something you have to be cognizant of, but never feels overbearing. It's a way to encourage you to continue to craft, build, and optimize your inventory. All this works so well because of the dirty little secret. RE4 is an action game masquerading as a horror game. The game ramps into its action incredibly well. My biggest criticism of most horror games, and especially Resident Evil 7, is it's a horror game that all of a sudden wakes up one morning and says, I'll be an action game for the last 4 hours. And you're quickly reminded that RE7 was never built to be an action game. Now RE4, on the other hand, lays that foundation immediately. The first mission is dozens of dudes coming at you and you're just opening fire and not even worrying about that little ammo counter down there. Outside of shooting, you're given a bunch of puzzles to solve, which are quick and punchy, and a nice little break from roundhouse kicking everyone in the world. Level design is awesome. A lot of maze-like levels that fall on top of each other and need minimal backtracking. I think my biggest surprise with the level design is I fully expected a Metroidvania style game, similar to RE2, but instead I got something more linear. The game is almost broken into like 4 or 5 separate Metroidvania areas, each with their own set of bad guys to face, side quests to do, and goodies to pick up. I think I actually preferred this style of gameplay. It gave the game a much better way to ramp up enemy difficulty and variety. And oh boy, do we have enemy variety out the wazoo here. You're very consistently given new enemies over and over again. You have the villagers, for example. Now that you've mowed down 100 of them, you think you got their number and then...
Jesus, it's got teeth.
There's always something new to experience for RE4's gameplay, though for all the good, there are a few bumps here. Controls in general feel very clunky and archaic. While gunplay is satisfying, traversal and movement feel sluggish at times. Trying to find the button to slice someone with your knife almost feels not worth it, since you could just pull out your gun quicker and have the same effect. Movement speed overall is really frustrating. Your run speed feels like a walk, and your walk speed feels like a crawl. Unless it was for me to get some pretty B-roll of a new area, I was always running, which for some reason is tied to a button. If your walk speed is going to be 0.3 miles per hour, then can we just have run bound to the joystick? Because of this, there are some fights that feel like a chore, and if movement was a little bit more fluid, they could have been big winners. Though when it comes to combat encounters that work, we gotta talk about the boss fights again. Outside of one fight in particular, the boss fights with your big baddies are so theatrical and a blast to play. Ramon. My guy Ramon. This little Benedict Arnold looking ass. His boss fight is one of my favorite boss fights out there. Epic music, the appropriate amount of difficulty, perfectly telegraphed attacks, and some awesome voice acting, making for one of my favorite gaming moments in the last few years. RE4's gameplay is really what brings it together. It helps contextualize all the story silliness in its awesome setting. If you like the video game part of your video games, then you'll be right at home with RE4.
One day betrayed. You're the hunter and then you're the prey. You pay the cost.
Resident Evil 4 Remake for the most part lived up to the monstrous amount of hype placed on its shoulders. While there are still a few parts of it that show its 2005 roots, these are things that can be pretty easily looked past. You may not pick up the controls or movement right away, but after a couple hours you learn to cope with them. And cope I would, over and over again. Because this game's highs are the peak of the mountain. The campy dialogue and characters, the awesome enemy design, the clean gunplay, and sheer amount of things to do make RE4 Remake stand on its own. If you're looking for a flat out fun video game, then Resident Evil 4 Remake is going to be a great addition to your library to play this year and for years to come.
Because